This talk is called How to Succeed at Anything, Part 2. And it is a sequel to a talk I gave 5 years ago. My name is Joe Casavar. I am the Puzzles by Joe guy. And I have a successful game called Clutter that I just released the 17th version of it. It's actually number 1 for at least the next couple hours on Big Fish. And this is also a sort of a companion talk to the talk I gave on Friday. But let's just move forward, and we'll go from there. And I basically use these slides as reminders to myself. There we go. So I already told you who I am. Why should you listen to me? Well, the talk I gave on Friday was called The $6 Million Game, and it is true that the Clutter franchise has made about $6 million in sales. I only get about a third of that, and when you divide that through by, 15 years or so. Did I put a slide for that? No, I didn't, so we'll not. Okay. So I had the slide for the other talk. 2 million over 15 years is still pretty good. It's better than working for somebody else. And I didn't go back. Why didn't I go back? There we go. Before I get started, the obligatory disclaimer, which is you shouldn't listen to me. You should take everything I say with a huge grain of salt. You should use your own critical thinking skills and, with everything you do. And that was part of what my first talk was about. So we're just going to move on with a quick recap. Previously on How to Succeed at Anything. My last talk, I was trying to do general rules of success, and I opened with a really nice, I thought was a great opening, probably my favorite of all time, where I said you made a decision before you were 7 years old that has affected your whole life. And this was a clue to that decision, and that we would revisit it in the talk. The full name of the talk was actually How to Succeed at Anything if Oprah, Deepak, and Tony were game devs. And this was the slide I used for critical thinking. I put up slogans by everybody, I graded them, and I rethought them. I wanted you to rethink them. Were they really good advice or not? And yes, that was me in the lower right-hand corner. And one of the last points I made with this is that every one of those people up there, they have a skill that's better than the skill that made them famous. And that skill is shameless self-promotion. If they weren't good at that, you would never have heard of them. And you can think about that for your game, but also you can also think about it as why you should question people that are famous. Because famous doesn't mean they're good at what they do. It means they're good at getting you to know about them. Okay. And then I brought back the thing in that first picture was actually a glass of water. And before you're 7 years old, you decide whether you're an optimist or a pessimist. And your worldview gets locked in. And this is, you're still believing in the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus. And this is, maybe you should revisit that. And that was the sort of the rest of the talk and some advice. And just a lot of practical advice along the way. That slide right there we'll revisit in a little bit. And it's interesting, when I reviewed this to do this talk, the most important thing that's grown out of that talk was just a nugget of wisdom. I had nuggets of wisdom throughout. And it wasn't even one of the main 10 points, but it's what this talk's going to end up being. But I ended that talk, before so forth, just trying to get you up to know that you have your own free will and freedom of choice, and you can take choice and make action. And every day you can decide, whether you should reevaluate your worldview and that glass of water, etc. Okay. But tonight's episode is called Keeping It Real. It stars Joe Casavar as Giuseppe Kaczynski. And Giuseppe Kaczynski, by the way, is my pen name. When I create quotes within my own game, every Clutter level, you get a picture at the end, and you get usually a nice picture and some quote from somebody. Well, sometimes I want to do my own quotes, and Giuseppe Kaczynski, which only a few of my customers have figured out is actually me, even though I think it's not that well described. And I think I told them finally a couple of games ago that I was Giuseppe, but not everybody reads everything I put in the games. But tonight's special guest star is LT Time. And that stands for, we'll get to what that stands for in a second. This is to point out again that this is a talk that is a sequel to a talk 5 years ago, as well as it's a companion talk to the talk I gave 2 days ago. And that talk will be up online on the GGDA or on ShaoCon. You'll be able to find a link to that talk even if you didn't see it. And that talk was more clutter specific. And this is also there to remind me to thank these two guys, which is why I do this talk. Andrew is generous enough that I've done several talks over the years for the GGDA. He runs, and that stands for the Georgia Game Development Association on the left there. If you think of games in Georgia, he's the first person you should really think of. He does a lot at the state level on, he's done things with taxes that we can do tax write-offs that's similar to, he's linked the games to the movie industry, among other things. And he does a lot of good work on so many levels. We won't get into it, okay. So, and Bob Carter, who has created ShaoCon, which is why I'm here, and he asked me to do this. I met Bob about 8 years ago when he was keynote speaker at SimFest in Columbus, Georgia, which was just a one-day festival. But his talk was so good that, he put my talks to shame, and I said I got to get better at doing talks. So, he likes my talks, and he talked me into doing 2 talks for him and the ShaoCon. Okay, so this is a unique thing I came up with, and it's the core. If you can get one thing from this talk, this is it, is to realize that everything you do is in preparation for a future path that you can't predict. And I actually put this in one of my games, and I had fun with it, which is why all the coloration goes on, and it's trying to set up expectations, and now even the last word is even, it breaks everything it's set up to do. But really, that's the core of this. And this was the one nugget from 5 years ago that people came up to me afterwards, and, this became probably the most important thing in that talk, even though it was just a nugget of wisdom, and even though I named it wrong, because it's not lottery ticket of times, it's lottery tickets of time. It makes no sense as one ticket. But basically, once you realize that everything you do is in preparation, there was all these things I suggested they do instead of just go home, Netflix, and chill, because you never know which one's going to pay off. So we're going to get into that in depth, so I'm going to stop there and just move forward. And I'm going to explain how I came up with this, or how my life led to this, as well as some better examples. So this talk, Origin A, you can swim in my pool someday, explore the world, understand the world. Origin B, my 7th grade teacher, change your present, change your future. What are tickets made up of? Fun, feathers, philosophy, and free will. Small winning tickets and Maslow's triangle. And what was clutter? Okay. So, I grew up in a jock family. And I have 3 brothers. They're nice, but occasionally, I would get annoyed with them. And I wasn't as jockish as they were. And when I got annoyed, on a rare occasion I'd say it out loud, but I thought it definitely a bunch of times. And the thought was this: you can swim in my pool someday. And if I have to go back in time, that is really me formalizing my own notion of the lottery ticket. I'm going to work hard today so I have a better future. That's the bottom line. And it was a little arrogant. It's more, my future is going to be better than yours, and I've definitely relaxed on that kind of a thing. But as a 7-year-old kid, 8-year-old kid, that's what it was. You can swim in my pool someday. And I thought it was humorous. It's funny. And again, I probably got beat up saying it out loud, so I didn't say it out loud too much. But I thought it, and I worked hard at things. You'll see. We'll get to it. I was a little scientist right off the bat. legend has it, my very first sentence was by self, Mummy. And that wasn't, hey, I did this by myself. Look, be proud of me. That was leave me alone. By self, Mummy. Get away, I want to learn on my own. The very first experiment I ran was, is there a tooth fairy? And I suspected my parents, or my mom specifically. So I wiggled the tooth loose, put it under my pillow for 2 nights without telling her, and then told her on the 3rd day. Sure enough, 3rd night, money showed up. Yep, Mom's the tooth fairy. Okay? And this led to an immediate distrust of reliable information from adults. So, however, my father taught me, this is before kindergarten, because I have a bad left eye, and because of that, I really, as much as I played baseball, I can't catch a ball, I think, as well as my brothers, etc. So to get my father's love, I used to watch him do the books at night, and he taught me long division before kindergarten, and really that's my first algorithm. It's a lot of little steps that if you put them together, you get the right answer. And it's useful. I mean, I made it to 1st grade and everybody else is worried about their times table and I'm just, kicking butt. This was me not believing that the entire world could truly prove something that was true that I haven't accepted yet. And this is cribbage. And in cribbage, the lowest score you can't get is 19. So when you have a hand that has no points in it in cribbage, you say, oh, 19, and everybody knows what you mean. Well, I didn't believe 19 couldn't happen. And I sat on the floor and proved it to myself because I thought everybody else possibly could have made a mistake. And again, I'm only 8, 9 years old at this time. That's a little plastic computer I had. That's a game that's actually in my game. And the problem with that little 9-piece puzzle is you can only solve it once. I mean, you can then memorize the solution. It's not. And I wanted a random version of that. So that's one of my first things that annoyed me about really good puzzles that you can only do once. And lastly here is I was reading books, and this is math books I'm reading in 4th, 5th, 6th grade, puzzle books. And that book on the right taught me some algebra without calling it algebra. So that when I hit algebra in 8th grade, I went, oh, I've been doing this stuff, But again, I was learning from books, reliable sources, etc. So, yes, I love to read. So the second step of trying to figure out the world is I read. I read the encyclopedia in my house. It was Encyclopedia Britannica. I loved my trips to the library with my mom. I read math and science, explainer books. Even in 8th grade, 7th, 8th, 9th grade, I'm going to the bookstores and I'm pulling out Masters and Johnsons and I'm getting some answers. Because I hear jokes and there's some truth in jokes, but I'm sure as hell not going to sit down with my mom or dad or an adult saying, hey, explain the world to me. And it was much easier to at least get real information, from reliable books. I've read a lot of philosophy and religion over my life. I loved pop psychology at one point. I loved self-help and allegory stories. Got into science fiction for a while. I moved my science fiction to liking comics and especially storytelling. And all of this has added up to, what I've become and what I like to talk about. So in 7th grade, this is from Dead Poets Society, but the quote isn't. This is from my 7th grade teacher, one of my favorites. And he pointed out there is more to life than sports in Pennacook. And Pennacook is just a little town of 3,000 right outside of Concord, New Hampshire, where I grew up in. And I went to school. There was only 156 people in my graduating class. It was pretty big. It was actually 5 towns and stuff. But they were sports obsessed, like small towns tend to be. And this was so important, I put it in twice. Because, man, I heard this in 7th grade and I went, yep, this is my ticket out of the prison. I definitely believed him. I saluted and said, yep, yep, yep. And I just was ready to leave the town, even in 7th grade. Okay. So I'm read a lot. What else have I learned, that leads to the lottery ticket, mentality. I learned from sports, from being the only non-jock brother, and the only sport I really could compete with them was baseball. Basketball. Baseball, I wasn't that good. And they were more athletic, but if I worked harder, I could compete with them. And this is what I learned is you could get better at something by working hard at it. And in fact, I probably was a little snotty to, not to kids, but the idea, if a kid wasn't that good, it's because he wouldn't work at it, as I felt, which isn't quite true. Definitely isn't. It's not true. There's a lot of other things going on, like maybe, maybe he has a rougher life at home. There's so many things, reasons why. But back then it was like, oh, he's just not working hard enough, kind of a thing. But there are some basic skills you have to have. It's more than that. But there is a connection. I play piano. I really wish I practiced piano more because I wish I was better at it. People think I'm okay when they hear me play, but really I took lessons for 4 years and I learned what most people learn in 1 year. In those 4 years. I was horrible. I used to practice the day before I had my lesson, but I loved playing enough, and I had a smart enough teacher that he gave me a fake book with just guitar, even though I learned some classical, with just guitar chords and the melody, and I learned to at least fake and get decent that way. And when I stopped taking lessons, I started playing much more. And I even wrote songs in college, and I still love playing today. I own a piano, kind of a thing. And but I also regret that I didn't, that my effort wasn't better at that, especially at a younger age. Chess, decent at chess, not great, studied it at different points, but never been a fanatic on that. Problem with chess is you really need somebody that's about the same level as you to have fun playing against. And some of the stuff much easier to do nowadays with the internet. Ping pong. College, horrible freshman year, horrible, worst ping pong player ever. I met a guy in my fraternity, I think junior year, who said you don't have to slam like people do. And I learned how to become a really good defensive chop kind of player and loved it. But again, tons of work. When I meet somebody that says, oh, I'm decent at ping pong, this is horrible. This is my arrogant youth about half a lifetime ago. Somebody would say, I'm decent at ping pong. I said, oh, really? Have you ever played 8 hours a day for, 3 months in a row? And he goes, they'll go, no. And I'll go, yeah, you're only so good. I'm pretty sure I can beat you, kind of a thing. And it was kind of fun being a chopper because most people only have practice against slammers. So even if they're good, they might not know how to handle me, whereas I have much more practice against them. But that's just a silly aside. Okay, Rubik's Cube. I'm really good at this. At one point, I thought I was probably the oldest, fastest Rubik's Cuber, that there's nobody older than me that's faster than me. But I read about a lady in China now that is I probably can't say that anymore. But I'm really good. I do it at about 30 seconds on average, which is really slow compared to the 10 seconds that all the youngsters are doing now and so forth. But I love the cube, and I still do it every day and so forth. And it's a perfect example of practice, makes perfect. And then this is Legos and coding. And I had this theory early on in my coding career, and it's how I think of it. Coding is the perfect Legos. It's abstract Legos. You can build anything you want with it. And the way I do it is I want to build something that works really well and then push it off, and then it becomes the thing instead of the code. You never have to deal with the code again. So even if you wrote a little calculator thing, now you use it as a calculator. You'd never go into the code and do it unless you want to make it a scientific calculator now or something else. But I think of code as, and I spent my life, since 1981 doing this, which is why clutter was at least possible for me, because I do love coding. I am a code monkey and so forth. Okay. So, yep. You're not going to, this is something I believe in my gut. More effort, better results. Doesn't mean you can do everything, but, there's a connection there. So now you have all these pieces. And again, this is the slide. But I asked myself, yeah, learn a new skill is good, read a book is good, improve at anything is good. Imagine your better future. But I missed some pieces here. One of the things I miss is things like this conferences and having networking and people. Every person, you can make a case now that you should be nice to everybody because they're a lottery ticket. Now that sounds horrible on some level, but it's true. You never know which one of those is going to come back. And years later, I got jobs from people that have definitely impacted my life because I wasn't a jerk. Now, I was a jerk at different times to different people in my life, sure. But every time you do that, you're burning a lottery ticket because you don't know that. Now, that doesn't mean you have to suck up to everybody and so forth, but being nice is buying a lottery ticket. There's much to be said there. Doing any type of creation, even if you think it's just for yourself. Me, I was writing songs way back. I did stand-up comedy for a while. Anything you create is the act of creation itself is a lottery ticket because you really don't know what's going to happen with that thing and what all the repercussions. And you're usually learning something to do something while you create. So you're getting better at something anyways. And the last thing that I missed is you really have to figure out how to energize yourself and you relax and treat yourself well because you can't just think lottery tickets the whole time. You can't. There are times, even though I used to say, lottery tickets at the time was the alternative to Netflix and chill. There are times you need to just Netflix and chill because you need to recharge. You need to treat yourself well. So the flip side to all this, there are some things you don't have to get better at. This is another one. This isn't me, but this is third grade. I looked it up, the picture, and the important part is this is somebody skating that fell on their butt. I did that exactly 3 times. I think the third time I also slammed my back a little bit, hit my head, and I said, I do not need to do this ever again. And I kept that promise to myself till about senior year when we had like an ice party at an ice rink, and I went very, very slow and so forth. But I concluded very early that I don't need to get better at this. I do not need to put in more effort and get better results. Philosophy, another trap. It's nice to have a worldview and a philosophy and think about, is there life after death and all the big questions. Do we have free will? But at some point, that's a trap. You need to take action. You need to figure out something. And there's several traps. This one, is it free will or deterministic? Well, if it's deterministic, man, you got no choice anyways but to think you have a choice. So who cares? Who cares whether it's free will or determinism? I'll play the free will every time. I like the notion of Forrest Gump and the feather and following things, but randomness can also be a trap and so forth. Just not the same as getting something done. So here's the glass of water again. And again, you should evaluate it every day, but not get lost in it. It makes no difference whether that's half full or half empty. It's half a glass of water that you can use you can water plants with it, you can take a shower, you can do many, many things that are more practical. And I am, practical, mostly. And again, you can think yourself to death or you can take that next step up. Steve Martin used to do this joke, which I'm not going to do because it's not going to translate well, but he used to talk about being a philosophy major for 4 years. And then he did this really stupid thing where he would walk really slow and then just half in the water. And then he kept thinking and putting his hand up. And then he finally, he looked at himself where he was, 2 seconds. And he went, did I do that? Okay. And this is the antithesis. You don't have to be trapped in your brain and so forth. Okay. This is the only other slide from 5 years ago that Bob himself loved this slide, and I like it too. And the important part is you can't mess with the triangle. It is so hard. You can't work on your self-esteem while you're choking on a sandwich, or if you're starving. It's really tough. So you have to take care of each level. And I'm going to first show the game dev here one. So for game devs, it was, you got to pay the rent before you create the great game. Otherwise, you starve to, not going to work. You need enough extra money to get some tools and equipment. Your dev friends will help you with the love and belonging stuff. And if you get competent enough where you can do clones of other games, like you can do a runner, you can do a space shooter or whatever, then that kind of works on your self-esteem and stuff. But you're really not self-actualized till you start doing original IP, because that should be your goal. And again, you can get trapped at any point, but also lottery tickets work at every level. You're paying the rent, right? Or when you show up to work on time and do your job, you're buying a lottery ticket. You might get a raise. You might get a better thing. So what? Now you can step outside yourself and go, well, there's bigger problems and all that. But you can also look at your life at each little level and say, what can I do here that ups my odds for, again, moving up that triangle? And each one has its own little tickets, and they might just pay off in small amounts, but they're still, worth thinking about. Okay. This is one of my levels of my clutter game that I love. And the purpose here is, so they say God, Einstein said famously, God does not play dice with the universe, but lottery tickets of time do. Okay? You really have to respect the randomness. And this was a philosophy I used to have. I used to really, really believe in this, that if you wanted to go from point A to B, what you do is you imagine B really well and really well defined. But then you open yourself up to how the universe is going to provide that for you. In fact, there was even a slogan that went with it, that the universe conspires to take away everything you want, but also conspires to provide everything you need. It's kind of a Zenism or whatever. But I don't really, really believe this as hard as I used to, because this is sort of the same garbage that The Secret is, or The Wish, or whatever. You have to do more than just sit back and think about it. Okay, but in the lottery ticket of time, what this translates to is you shouldn't care too much which tickets pay off. You should really follow any ticket that does pay off, at least a little bit, and you should appreciate it when a ticket pays off. Okay, so again, you have to really respect the randomness. So, before I get into the humble brag portion of the show, I wanted to give you a little bit of my background of my failures. So I was a sophomore in college and I lost my financial aid. Almost didn't graduate. But I walked in, found out that if I got my grade point up by a point, that I could come back and I could get my scholarship back, basically. And I actually took on an extra course, had my first real girlfriend of my life, worked 20 hours a week at UPS from that point on to the end of my college, and all that. And I rose, my grade point average went up one and so forth, and it taught me a valuable lesson. I found out that when I have a little time to screw around, I'll screw around a lot. But if I have no time to screw around, I am very efficient. And in fact, this was the same time I spent, that all my free time during this period of time was playing ping pong and getting better at ping pong. And I did all that again under this really constraint, but it was, they say if you want something done, if you need help at office, if you want something done, ask a busy person. And it's right. Because if you're a slacker and you just expand and so forth, and you keep pushing procrastination or whatever. This situation taught me to get very efficient, at least with my own life and choices and stuff. Okay. I spent 2.5 years on my very first game. It made $0. I did it to learn C, which was my ticket I was really buying. But I thought I wanted to make money, but I didn't know much about the industry and stuff, and it was back when shareware went around. And it literally made no money, but the small lottery tickets paid. It got me 3 job offers that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And also, later on, I spent another 3.5 years making 9 Windows games, but I couldn't get anybody to Puzzles by Joe, and you guessed it, made me 0 money. But it led directly to me creating the Mahjong games for iWin, which led directly to me doing Clutter. Okay, so the book on the left is a book I read, I think, in one weekend once I got started. Just loved it. And I've read all of his books. And he has, one of his theories is just thinking in general is just analogies. That brain intelligence is analogy. That's why it's on the SATs, right? That it's all about making connections. And historically, people know me as somebody that really makes bad analogies. But I believe with a lottery ticket of time and clutter, I came up with a pretty good analogy, I think. So these aren't the tickets. These are all lucky cats. But there's big ones, small ones. They're all mixed in. And you don't know which one's going to pay off, like before. And it hit me that clutter is not only a lottery ticket, all my effort that I put into clutter, but it's a lottery ticket that paid off for me. And this $800 a week for life is nothing compared to what, let's see, I want to do that right, 800 times 50, yeah. Clutter provides much better than that lottery ticket for me. And clutter helped me win the lottery. It was a big ticket, and it's an ongoing ticket. There's nothing like original IP. The other talk has more about that. Knock on wood, but if I got hit up by a truck today, my clutter games would still bring in 200 to 300,000 over the next couple of years, all 17 of them, even without me, because the process has started and they're out there making money. And it's great. It's really nice. So here are my lottery tickets, or some of them. The one over to the left is all my recreational mathematics games, recreational math books and stuff. And I pulled some puzzle ideas from out of there. The stuff on the right is all my hand manipulation puzzles and stuff. And I think they give me a good perspective of how not to get in the way of the fun of the player, and why the number one word that people use about clutter is that it's addicting. And I think, all the experience here did that. And the ones in the middle are really only half my computer books. I had at least 2 to 3 times more than those that were computer language driven. But you don't need those anymore. Those are on the computer, right? But I used to buy, a better C, more efficiency, what do they call it? Not evolved C, but C in depth. I mean, it was all these books that were, even books on like syntax and how to get better and so forth. I read them all. And they all led to, the fact that I love code and how I got here today. Okay, so don't need that again. So this slide that I created for this talk that's the Joe Casvar at AOL.com. That part is actually my first 10 years in the business. That was the slope of my game. And the upper right-hand corner that says puzzlesbyjoe.com is what it did on the last 5 years. And that's how it looks. These are all my games. And there's 2 things to point out. I almost did not do the second clutter. That first clutter made $50,000 for a man years of work over 15 months, and that was not good. I wanted it to make over 100K or less than 10 and just bust. I came this close not to do clutter 2. If I'd never done clutter 2, that first clutter game would have only made about 60,000. That first clutter game has now made 250,000 for me. Those are all my games. You can see how there's sort of a curve at the bottom there, but then the last 5 years have really been this, straight line. And the other talk's more about how that happened and why. And I've averaged 200,000 a year for the last 5 years. And it's just cool. I thought it was really cool when I did this talk, because really that little red marker is when I gave the talk 5 years ago. I'd spent 10 years in the business. I was almost at $1 million then. And now in the last 5 years, I've made it to 2 million. I will this December, actually. So I ended my other talk with this. This was playing on my Spotify when I was wrapping up the other talk, and I said, this is really good. This just fits so well. And I used to believe, I used to follow the feather and be into synchronicity and all that stuff. And now I just kind of laugh when it happens. But this was so nice, I put it in. And I'll read it. My hands were steady, my eyes were clear and bright. My walk had purpose, my steps were quick and light. And I held firmly to what I felt was right, like a rock. And that's by Bob Seger. And 15 years, one step at a time. And Giuseppe Kaczynski, again, is my pen name. And I ended the talk with the future of clutter. So, clutter's already on mobile, but it's full games that didn't do that well. Didn't cost me any money, so I made some money from it, but not big hits because it's not. The PC games are not made for the phone, but some people wanted to port them, so I let them, and we did okay. But this is a portrait version I did just to prove I could do one in portrait mode that would play well. And I thought this was going to go further, but it hasn't yet. So it's really just a lottery ticket that's hoping to be cashed someday. I will also be on a web browser soon. I can't tell you the company, but they've got like 18 million players and stuff. And I'm very excited about this. And that's excited coming up. So I ended the last talk, which was called, Experiments Worth Doing. What I'm going to do next with clutter? Well, I'm going to run another experiment. I'm going to take another step. But then I did this talk. And this talk was already done when I realized, man, what these two things are, you put them together. I'm just going to buy some more lottery tickets at a time. That's it. Where are we on time ourselves here? 11 what? 11:10. That's early. Good. So we do have some time for some questions. Do we have any questions online? No. So the question and answer period might be quite short. Tom, you got any questions?
I'm trying to think if there's I do have a question for you that may be completely irrelevant, but I'm going to ask him.
Oh, go for it.
I have a friend who's trying to develop physical board games. Do you have any advice for people doing that as opposed to electronic, or is your experience specific to electronic?
Well, so there's people in that monthly meetup I talked to you about that show up with that. There's people at these types of conferences that do that. You definitely got to put up a prototype. You want to play test it a lot. You want to get it to a point where others can play test it and you don't have to say anything. If somebody's play testing my game, if somebody's play testing any computer game or whatever, and the developer says anything, he just killed the experience, 100%. And I'm amazed, this is something I've known for years, but I'm amazed at how many professionals get that wrong. Brad Merritt, who we talked about, who started the Atlanta Game Dev Group, he once gave a talk. One of my favorite talks was called, "You Suck at Sucking at Your Game." And it's amazing how much you learn from watching others, and especially you have to keep your mouth shut, because as soon as you prompt them to do you've just killed it. Okay. Do you have a question or no? Okay, I'm done on that one.
Yes, so earlier you mentioned C language.
Yeah.
Do you know any other languages other than C?
Oh yeah. I work. So I'm in Unity and C#. And in fact, that point in time is actually, I gave another talk on Friday, but that point in time I showed, let's try to go, oh, you did that, I'm not going to bring that up. And I'm going to shut this down, because I don't want people to see me. I want to shut this off. No, it's all, there we go. So iPhone isn't a language, okay? So iPhone, depending on if you're writing native, I think it's like Object-C or something like that. But Unity ports to all these different platforms. So that Android thing I did was also written in C# and Unity. But that point in time, 5 years ago, That was when I switched from doing things in C++, is what it was at the time, and I finally made the push to Unity. And I'd been using C++ for at least, 5 to 10 years before that. I started with C because C++ hadn't even shown up yet. And then when I first learned C++, I used it as what they used to call a better C. Because I didn't really understand object-oriented programming. It was sort of a shift. But you could still use it in the same ways you use C. It had just a little things that were different. But neither of those I would recommend. I mean, C# is great for a number of reasons. And Unity itself, I just love. And I put off going to Unity for a couple of years. I sort of kicked myself for that. But again, these game dev meetings I used to hold, people were complaining enough about bad things in Unity that I waited until their complaints were less. And I had to find the right person to really teach me, because I had some people do some projects for me, and I would look at their code, but it wasn't until I got a guy that we did some pair programming, where he wrote something, I would teach him how to improve some of his code based on my years of knowledge, and he would teach me how to, move around in Unity. And it truly was like moving from, a Volkswagen bus to a Porsche, and you don't want to be thrown into a Porsche and learn to drive on your own, right? I mean, that's how I use the comparison. And he was great, and I just, only a little while, but he was enough to get me over my own learning hurdle, my learning curve or whatever, and it was great. Did you have a follow-up?
So that's what I was going to ask.
Sure.
You have some folks write some part of the code and you embed it in your game, or?
No, I write everything. I am a one-man person. I'm a solopreneur. I occasionally have hired artists to do things, but correct. And in my other talk, I did talk about one of my failures is I had a game do so well. I took longer on the next game, and I met these two young women that had just graduated from college that were actually type A's, and I decided I would have them write the story and do the art for a game, and it was my most standard clutter yet. It had cutscenes. It was more typical other games. There was no hidden object component, but there was still this story that was kind of cute, and we did some silly stuff. And it cost me, I think, 12 grand over the year or so we did it, that I paid them, and it made less money. So the artist, I loved her art so much, she was already working on the next game called Clutter 7, and I shelved that, and Clutter 7 became Clutter Infinity for a variety of reasons, but some of that's explained in the other talk. But since then, I think I've had one person do a little Unity code for me, but since I learned it, it's all me now, pretty much.
I just taught myself about 2 years now,
Yep.
but I'm going to use it for building robots, and I did not know that there was an object.
Right. So what is your development environment? Are you Unreal? Are you?
No, I'm using Arduino. I'm teaching myself all of that. I'm using Arduino for locating.
Okay, so look up Unity. So Unity is a tool that you can use for free, and it might be a bit of a learning curve, but if you can make it through that, I mean, you're doing your own graphics in C++.
I'm not doing any graphics because I did not know that there was a code like graphics.
So how are you moving? What?
It's just all syntax code.
Oh, really? Yeah. You need to get to a graphics engine and see. Way back, you had to write your own little graphics library or something, or write things with line. Nowadays, you just drop objects into a scene, and really, it's a whole thing to learn. But it'll get you really excited, and you've already know C, which is good. So you write these things called scripts that just attach to the objects. Scripts. And they attach to an object and give an object properties. And that's how it works nowadays. So it's, and again, I'm not great. I I consider myself an expert in Unity only in 2D, and everybody else uses Unity for 3D. Okay? But I use it to just get my games out and, so forth. Sure, go for it.
I'll try one more. You kind of mentioned there where you brought in the other people and did a little experiment with the change in
Yeah.
the game style and it didn't pan out. Are there ones you've done and like this is going to be gold and it just didn't click with people for whatever reason?
So in my other talk, I have a thing called, after Clutter 3, I realized I was just creating commodity. So picture a can of coffee beans going down a treadmill. Nobody cares how shiny that can is. All they care about is how quickly they can get another can of coffee beans. And that's sort of my game. So each game, about 10% plus or minus. Now I've had exceptions, but I don't know, is it because there were 2 or 3 weak games before? It's so weird. I had one game that sat on the front page of this one site for 6 or 7 months, and when I pull that out of the equation, it looks about the same as others. But when I look back, it looks like it did so much better than everything else. And I can, in hindsight, go, well, why? Well, sometimes, if I had to put it all together now, I used to think it didn't matter. I used to think the coffee can was true. But you have to get them both, download your game, and then the percentage. So if you have something that's stickier, it's just like good marketing, right? If you have something that's stickier and attracts, gets them to try, that's good. So Clutter 5 was called Welcome to Clutterville. And number one, the name is a great name, okay? And it was Clutterville because of the V in Clutter. I was using Roman numerals and doing stupid stuff I do a lot of stupid stuff in my 17 games. It had this nice theme. Boom, boom, boom. It was really a up kind of a theme for the trailer. And the very first thing I did, and I only did it in one game, and I wonder whether I should do this again, They were told they had to enter the quest on their own. Now I dump them right into the first puzzle. I put up a message, I don't get them to the main menu, I bypass, and the main menu comes up and says, you're going to jump right into the game.
Right.
But in this game, they had 4 caves, and each cave had 3 areas. And I told them they had to find the gold quest right off the bat. And I think that little 5 seconds of, aha, was good, okay? Now, I had a lot of other things that were good about that game, and I had some superstars. I had a little freaking plane that did advertising that went by that was just so stupid. The exit sign, it was a ghost town sort of thing. So it was caves. It was like an old mining town sort of, but it was caves, and it was there was like a fire pit, and it was so forth. And there was the sign that had a population on it that did something extra. But the exit had buzzards, just flying around, which is really stupid and really easy. But it was just something we slapped in because, but the whole thing sort of, and the thing going by the top, I think I did, Eat at Joe's, buy Honest Pottery. They were all inside jokes, that if you watched it long enough, it did. And it did really well. However, one of the things that was really good is about 5 games ago, Clutter 12. Now, back at like Clutter 10 or 9, I asked Big Fish, can I be a collector's edition? Which is, you sell it for twice as much, you put a little extra in it, and that extra isn't in the standard edition. They said no, but 2 years later, they said yes. My first 2 games climbed up the top 100, and they were both the secondary game of the day, they were called. They put out more than one game of the day, and I was the secondary. And I watched the charts, and I knew I beat the people that put me on, front. Third game went out, and third game went from 800 by 640 to 1024, 768, got bigger. It took longer to get it, but it did better than the first 2 combined, sort of, or whatever. But it still bumped sales and so forth. But it was good. I rushed out the next game because it was called Minigame Madness Tour. I wanted to see if they would buy a game that was focused on the minigames. No. so forth, and then 5 killed. And then 6 was the really gorgeous one. And by the way, it's interesting, the gorgeous one didn't have as good of sales, but I think it got my attention to the producers and marketing and so forth, and people started noticing the games a little bit more. Then a few more games go by the way, I start getting clones. There's a shopping clutter that has 26, and in the other talk I talked about, there's so many clones now of this. Clutter is now considered its own subgenre of hidden object game. It's at least responsible for these whole collection of games that are nonverbal and so forth. And I'm proud of that. And none of them really compare to, quote, the original Clutter. And they know me as an author, which the stories over the years have gotten really meta and weird with the Clutter games. And that's the other talk, okay? But my audience knows me. I am truly an author now. I think of myself as an author with a body of work. And every game has been different. But some of the other people like Big Fish Game House, whatever, they know me as somebody who does something different each time, right? And that has helped. And in fact, Clutter is always on the front page. There's a thing called Clutter Series on Game House, which is really nice. And they rejected the very first game. That's a different story for another time. I'm always on the front page of iWin. I have my own series there called the Clutter Series. And they mixed it originally with Shopping Clutter used to show up with them. I said, no, I either take me off or take them, So, and just staying around long enough. There's a slide in the other game that says, the perfect is the enemy of the good enough. And I use a quote from Steve Martin, I think, in it, that it says, be so good they can't ignore you. And I changed that to be good enough and stick around long enough so they can't ignore you. So, and I'm really, people, it's really been a ride. I'm just so, I've been lucky, but I work hard. I really, yeah. And I think about the whole other talk, I love proving, people wrong, especially about the game business. And in the other talk, I use the, I almost included in this talk, but it's the cognitive bias about survivorship. So people only look at the winners and try to learn stuff. And it's much easier to look at the losers and then not do what they did, right? And what happens in the game industry when I was pitching games, no, so forth, because it wasn't like enough or whatever. Or nobody will buy a game without a story. It's a puzzle game. Yes, they will. Okay? But you have to be the one willing to run the experiment to, prove them wrong. And so, sure, go for it.
As a puzzle person,
Yeah.
I'm wondering what you think of escape rooms. Are you a fan of escape rooms?
Yes, I am. In fact, but they're a mixed bag.
Yeah.
And by the way, there was a personal escape room. There's a thing called Box of One by Neil Patrick Harris.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Oh, it's great. It's great. And I did it with my daughter, but it's still just this personal. It's so well. And I tried something else from that same company and wasn't happy. But the Box of One was really just everything you want, in the game. And some escape rooms do that well. The best one I ever played was with my stepson, who was a really smart guy, got a PhD in chemistry, and we're doing it with my family and so forth. And it's, I think, 4 or 5 of us. And we're both working at the very end on 2 different puzzles that we didn't realize were actually totally related. And you had to sort of use one information from the, and we're not even sure if a switch over here had to, you know what I mean? But we finished it at the exact same time, and we beat it by about 10 seconds. It was the perfect, escape room experience. And it's really tough. As somebody who creates puzzles, it is so hard to create a puzzle at the right level. I deal with random. All my puzzles, by the way, are clutter. One of the things is clutter is totally replayable.
Yeah.
Almost every level, I have a box quote puzzle, but everything else is always a random scramble. And sometimes you get a good deal, sometimes whatever. But the hardness of it is the parameters, not the randomness itself. And over the years, I've changed what the basic clutter level. It used to be hunt, 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 find, hunt, 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 find. It's now much more find, 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 find. Oh, find, find. You know, it's a little different pace. And I have some shorter levels, and I have the longer. You know, and but timing's in all the games, and there's a lot that goes into them that makes the games, again, the comment they use the most is addicting. And this is one of the things I'm proudest of. There are people that have played my games for over 10 years, 10 to 15 years, and they play my game for over an hour a day, every day. And I hear from people that say, I don't play any other game anymore. They only play my game. And sometimes they even go back to the early, slower paced ones. You know, and each game I try to give them something that's going to blow their mind, that's going to make them fearful. One of my rules of thumb, which I think has proven, very successful, and any game dev should think of this. If a level looks difficult, it's easier than it is. If a level looks easy, it's harder than it is. In general, whenever you can do it. So I will freak them out with, all smile, these, just scare them right off the bat. And then, but it's a rarity. And now I'm to the point where I let them know that, okay, I've got a puzzle coming. You might have to think a little bit on this one. I have a great one I did recently that it's almost impossible to solve if you just solve it as a clutter puzzle. And it's spirals and things are moving around. But if you look at it long enough, you'll see there's circular objects. And there's more like square objects, like briefcases, like so forth. But there's, pies and cookies and stuff like that, and balls, and those. And only the round matches. And even though they're all intermixed, right? I mean, and if you don't realize that, you don't have enough time to solve it. But if you realize that, you're off to the races. I mean, you just really ignore, it's just, But it's a rarity I do something like that, because you don't have to be smart to play clutter. That's not the point of it. Even though it appeals to, I think, the wide spectrum intelligence-wise. And some people play it without a timer. I fall asleep, I nod. To play it well, you defocus a little bit and you let the matches come to you. And this is really tranquil. You can, and some people use it for that, in a sense, that they like that. Where are we on time? Should just wrap it up and say bye. Thanks for coming.